Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Now that my obligatory informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And a news story came out yesterday. It came through from my feed. A couple of people linked it to me. They're like, Jason, what do you think about this BS? And it's a story that's titled that a bodybuilder needed emergency surgery as a result of too much protein. Again, we get to this sort of absurdity, and I'll talk about the absurd aspect of it in a minute. But the backstory is you have this guy in the UK, I guess a mid-range competitive amateur bodybuilder. He's been competing for a couple years, had been doing bodybuilding shows, and he had a problem with his bowel getting twisted. He was in a lot of abdominal pain. He goes into the doctor, and something had happened along the way. They told him he was taking too much protein or consuming too much protein, and he had to have emergency surgery, and it turns out that his bowel was twisted, and they had to untwist it and everything. And he couldn't lift heavy for 6 months. They told him not to lift heavy for a while, and then he ended up doing a strongman competition later. Then he went back into bodybuilding. And the whole problem with that is that you're dealing with something like a twisted bowel, which is not a result of protein in your diet. That is ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous. If that happened, this would be the first documented case of this happening, and there are enormous numbers of strength athletes and bodybuilders and everyone else who eat a lot of protein, probably eat more than he does, who don't have this problem. It's never been a case of this happening before anywhere that I am aware of. And yet it's going to be blamed on protein. And that's the other problem we run into also. Occasionally people will say things like, oh, this bodybuilder had this medical issue, right? It's always blamed on protein. Or then they jump over to steroids. Like a lot of times, health problems that people have as a result of other things that they do get blamed on either protein, when it's actually sometimes is steroids, or even things are blamed on steroids when it's obviously other stuff. I mean, Flex Wheeler comes to mind. Right? Anyone who knows anything about what bodybuilders use, and again, I want to remind people I'm not a bodybuilder, not a fan of bodybuilding, but Flex Wheeler, I think, had kidney damage, major kidney damage. And I know he had to have one kidney removed, and I think he might have had to have both of them when he had a kidney transplant. But I know at whatever point he's working off just one kidney. He tried to jump up and say, oh yeah, it's because of the steroid abuse. You don't even see that happen. What is it that bodybuilders take that is absolutely associated with kidney damage? Potassium-sparing diuretics, which they use to get dry to get on stage, right? They want that ripped, shrink-wrap look when they get on a bodybuilding stage. And that oftentimes requires additional drugs that specifically change fluid balance in your body to achieve that. Diuretics are used with them. Well, diuretics have a long medical history of causing kidney damage and kidney failure, particularly the potassium-sparing ones. So that's another example of his diuretic use contributing to that. But then, people will look at a lot of these bodybuilders and other people who are consuming large amounts of protein, and then they'll say, oh, well, this one has some kidney issues. It must be the protein, or it must be this drug they're taking, without even going and looking at what the most obvious ones are. I mean, when you have different drugs and things out there that medically cause different issues, it's pretty easy to figure out, gee, which ones are they taking that's most likely to be it, one that we think might cause this issue, or one that has caused this issue in hundreds of patients throughout the world over the years in a clinical environment. Well, it's probably that one, since they're using both of them. But, again, protein gets this bad rap and it gets blamed for all these problems. What's the reality of it? High protein intake is oftentimes associated with a lot of health benefits. People who have healthy kidney function don't seem to have problems with very high protein diets. This was a concern for years, but it's been looked at closer, and it turns out it's not really the big concern that we think it is. What else do we find? That people who consume more protein tend to be leaner, have better body composition. When studies have been done on major protein overfeeding, what do we usually find? We don't see health negatives happen. In healthy athletic populations, we don't see these problems. They don't arise. Now, that's the other thing we come to with a twisted bowel. That's basically a deformity that happens for a number of different reasons. It's something you can be born with, that can develop later in life. And here's what I would suggest. It's silly to attribute this to protein. And you don't even see his doctors even saying that. There's nothing from his doctors, a quote from a direct doctor by name, making that claim, is there? This is what's being sensationalized in a news story. I don't see a name of a doctor on it saying, oh, this doctor said this is absolutely what caused this problem. No, you don't see that, because that doctor could lose his potential medical license for putting out bad information. he could have problems as a result of just making that up, particularly as a news story. So you're not going to see a doctor do it, but you'll see a news story do it. And it's people always want to demonize protein. It's got these concerns, but the reality is, what most likely happened, this guy started competing in different endeavors, whether it was bodybuilding and strongman and these different strength sports or body composition oriented sports that required him to eat more food. Well, if you have a twisted bowel, if you're born with a twisted bowel and you go through life just eating maybe a normal amount of food and you don't ever notice it, and then you for a year or two or more start consuming very, very large amounts of food, even more fiber, because that's one of the things they pointed out. Oh, well, you know, he needs to increase his fiber, reduce his protein, was something that was mentioned in there. Well, let's look at that realistically. If you have a twisted bowel, what's more fiber going to do? You're going to feel that. You're actually going to have pain and inflammation and other things come out as a result of that, because that extra fiber creates extra bulk in your GI tract and in your stool, and that's got to be pushed through. Well, when that gets pushed through that area, that's when you're going to really notice it. That's probably when it's going to get painful. It's when it's going to get painful. And yeah, they've got to go in there and surgically untwist it and reattach it. And he did pretty good with the surgery. But the point is, the very advice mentioned in the article, the news story, would actually cause the problem to manifest if it was already there and it was asymptomatic. Eating a bunch of fiber or anything that increases your food volume in general, it would make sense that that's when you're going to actually notice this problem come out, that's been dormant for 25 years. It's there. It's a problem. You just haven't felt the symptoms of it yet, because that's essentially a deformity. You're going to really notice it at that point. So it's not going to be the protein that causes it. It's going to be food volume, and fiber contributes to food volume. It's one of the largest factors in our total food volume for people who eat a varied diet, which is normally a good thing. You want to push all that stuff through. I mean, fiber has a lot of health benefits, but it would highlight this problem. It would make this problem that had been asymptomatic up to that point become manifest. And this whole idea to blame protein for a twisted bowel, which is, again, generally a birth defect. A twisted bowel is going to be blamed on too much protein in someone's diet. This doesn't happen to everyone else who consumes high protein, right? It doesn't happen to everybody else. So again, we see this case of something like protein being demonized by the media, when really the media should be demonizing, I don't know, all the garbage that people eat on a daily basis. Hyper-palatable, calorically dense, devoid of micronutrient foods that people are consuming and getting fat and sick on. That's what we need to be talking about. That's what we need to be talking about. You know, how much McDonald's and Coca-Cola are people consuming every day? I think that's a bigger concern than people eating too much protein. So to blame this sort of medical thing on protein in a news story is, again, absolutely ludicrous. The majority of people out there, the vast majority of people out there, would benefit from a health perspective from lifting weights and eating more protein. Let's be realistic here. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.